Welcome back to More Than Gardening. I'm out here with my yellow onions today, getting ready to harvest them. I'm gonna set them up to cure, and I'm gonna give you guys like a full rundown step by step of how I grew these, because I'm not gonna lie, they're pretty big. And I'd be lying if I said I wasn't super impressed and proud of these onions. They are way bigger than last year. They're bigger than the red onions. They just did way better this year than I ever thought they would. I've had a lot of challenges this year with these onions. So the fact that A, I'm getting a harvest, and B, I'm getting such a huge harvest blows my mind. In my red onion video that I posted like, I don't know, a month ago, I didn't go as in depth of like how I grew the red onions, because I have some other videos on my channel, like when I seed started, when I was taking care of them, when I planted them. And I just referenced those videos saying that if you want like step by step, like check those out on my channel. But I've gotten so many questions since then from the red onion video. And I've been getting so many questions on Instagram lately about growing onions that I thought in today's video, instead of just harvesting and setting them up to cure like I did in the red onion video, I'll give more of like a step-by-step summary on how I grew these. That way, this is like a one-stop shop video of like how to grow onions. So if you're harvesting yours right now and you're maybe not as happy with them, or you're trying to improve on them for next year, hopefully this video gives you the info that you need in order to grow bigger, better onions next year. The first thing I always get asked is how I know when to start harvesting these. And you're really just looking for their necks to break. So this onion was sitting in here like this with its neck broken. So that's sign one. And then sign two, I also wait for the greens to start drying out. So all of these greens, I'll get a little closer. All of these greens here are nice and brown. They're not totally brown, but they're, I don't know, a third of the way through. They'll brown the rest of the way in the curing process, but that's really all you're looking for, is for that neck to be broken and then the greens to start drying out. That's when I harvest them. Another good one. Whew, 3 big ones in a row. This was probably the size of like my biggest one last year. And now you can just see the difference. I just keep going down this line, and a few of these are definitely a little smaller. This one will probably be like the smallest one. So they're not all perfect, but oh, this one's like broken in half. This one I'll have to eat fresh because the neck didn't break. It just, I don't know, it broke in half. It got weird. But wow, this is nice. I'm just gonna keep on pulling these, and then we'll get them inside to start curing. I just got all of the onions set up inside on the racks to start curing. One of the biggest questions I always get is like, what do I do with the onions after I pull them if I'm not going to eat them fresh right away? What I do is I cure them, and then I store them to enjoy throughout the fall and winter. So curing them is basically just the process of drying your onions out. That way they can last in storage. So I put mine on these metal racks that I use. They're the same racks I use for all my seed starting. I just remove the lights from them. And then they're kind of the perfect onion curing setup because there's tons of airflow. They're on wheels, so I can easily move them inside if it's going to be rainy, or if it's going to be really hot and sunny. I can leave them outside to cure in the sun. So I really love those. I'll leave I'll leave a link in the description of this video in case you want to get those. But those will stay on those racks for like 3-ish weeks. And then I'll know that they're done curing and ready to be stored when the greens are totally dried out and the roots are also dried out. My red onions are in there as well, and those have been sitting for 4 weeks, and those are plenty cured. Those are totally done. So to store those, I'm just going to be cutting off all of the greens, which should now be called browns because they've totally turned brown. I will cut off the roots as well. I will cut off the greens so that there's about 1 inch above the actual bulb. And then I'm just going to store them in these like mesh bags. I'll leave a link for these bags as well. I love these. I used these last year for both my onions and my russet potatoes, and they work super well. And then from there, they'll just go in my pantry, and these onions should last well over 6 months. I mean, quantity wise, I have enough to last, I don't know, maybe around 9 months if we don't give too many away. I'm probably gonna share a lot of these with family because I've had a lot of my family recently ask for some of the onions. So I don't know how like quantity wise, how long they'll store, but the actual onions should store for at least 6 months. I grow storage onions, so the actual variety of the seed, which I'll leave a link in the description, they are made for storing. Not every onion is meant to be stored. So if you've grown onions in the past, you've done the curing process like I just explained, and then you try to store them like in a bag in your pantry, in a cellar, wherever, and they start sprouting and they go bad, you might not have been growing specific storage onions. So you need to make sure that when you're picking seeds, you're picking onions that are literally meant to be stored. So these are storage onions. I'm going to be storing them and then I'm going to be enjoying them throughout the year. So those are set up nicely in there. They'll be there for the next 3 weeks or so. I want to go through the questions on Instagram and just want to take you guys basically start to finish how I grew these, because it's not that complicated, honestly. I'll try to leave the high level steps also in the description. That way you can like screenshot it or whatever, I don't know, save it for next year or later whenever you start onions. But obviously, like, I'm not an expert. I think I've said a couple times in this video, this is only my second year doing it, so I am not an expert. I'm just saying what I have done and what works for me and what I'm gonna, continue doing moving forward. So if you've got any other tips and you are an expert onion grower, leave them in the comments. I'm sure there's tons of people that would love, to hear those. So the biggest question I got is whether I do seed sets or starts. I grow from seed. I was told in the beginning of my onion journey that seeds grow the biggest onions, so that's what I've done the last 2 years. And that's what works for me. So I always do onion seeds. I start those seeds, so I'm in zone 6A. I start those seeds the first weekend of January, and then I plant them in my garden about 4 weeks before the last frost. So I put the seedlings in, I think like April 13th-ish this year, because my last frost was supposed to be like May 13th. I think we all know how this past May went. It was very, very cold, and that was not our last frost, but that was supposed to be our last frost. The red onions got pulled July 19th, and then the yellow onions just got pulled today, and I'll tell you, it is August 15th. So usually onions only take like 6-ish months to grow. Mine did have some setbacks this year, which I think is what added a little bit of time onto them, but I mean, it worked out in the end. It's not a perfect science. Even if like a seed packet says, maturity in 6 months, like it might take longer, it might take less. It just depends on the condition. So I try not to read into that too much. When I started my seeds, I just start them in little 6-cell seeds trays, and I'll link the video to when I started my seeds, and I'll also link everything in the description of like what I use exactly, because so many people start onion seed differently. Some people will like broadcast them on a tray. Some people will grow a ton of onions in like just pots, and then they break apart the seedlings individually at the time of planting. I really prefer to just grow like one onion seedling per little tray, because then it's so much easier at the time of planting, because I'm planting so many onions. I did 2 beds this year. I think I did like 72 yellow onions and like 65-ish, 68-ish red onions. That the idea of separating all of those out and planting them, to me, is just, I don't want to be doing that. So I like putting 1 seed per cell, or I do like 2 or 3 seeds. I thin down to 1. So by the time of planting, I have 1 seedling per little cell, and I just pop them out of the seed cell. I plant them in the garden, and that's it. And then I just plant those. A lot of people are asking on Instagram about how deep I plant my onions, because people were amazed by how much they were bulbing above ground. I just plant my seed about 1/4 inch into the tray, and then when I plant that seed cell from the tray into the garden, I keep it like the same depth. I don't plant the seed cell any deeper or any shallower. I just make it even with the soil. That way that same 1/4 inch seed depth from the start carries over into the actual garden. And then as far as seedling care goes, like between when I start the seeds until I plant them out, I was just fertilizing with, I was using like a fish fertilizer at first, and then it was way too smelly in the house. I can usually bear it, but I was in the first trimester of my pregnancy during this time, and any smell was making me like, oh my gosh, I was just way too sensitive to that. So I had to switch from the fish fertilizer. Yeah, it's like a fish seaweed emulsion fertilizer. I'll still link it for you guys because I still use it outside, but I was using that, and then I switched to a Fox Farm one that didn't have a scent, because like I needed something odorless. And I did that. They're liquid fertilizer, so I'd mix them in with the water, and I would water my seedlings every like 5 to 7 days, and I would mix that fertilizer into them. I want to say like every other watering, or you could do like a lighter mixture every watering. It doesn't matter that much. The fertilizer should have directions on what to do for full-grown plants and for seedlings. So I just follow the directions of the seedlings. If it doesn't have directions saying what to do for little seedlings, I just do about like 1/4% of what the directions would say for like a regular size plant. So I dilute it a lot. That way the seedling isn't like too overwhelmed, but most fertilizers will say like exactly how much to do for seedlings. So I would just mix it into the water every like week to 2 weeks. And like I said, I was watering every like 7 days. I think that's something that shocks people, is how little I actually water, like my actual garden outside and my seedlings as they're growing, because people think, you know, your seedlings need water all the time, and like, no, they don't. The worst thing you can do for your plants is overwater them, and it's the most common thing that people do. They're fine. They don't need water. If your onion seedlings are starting to like flop over, yeah, they probably need water. Give them a little more, but rule of thumb, I'm like every like 7 days. That's how often I water my onion seedlings, and they did fine. Every time they got to, I don't know, above like 5 inches, I would cut them down or trim them to about like 3 to 4 inches. That way they just weren't tangling up and they would stay nice and straight. And that way they were focusing all their energy on building roots rather than like super tall leafy growth inside my house. And then once I planted them in my garden, usually I would never trim them again, because once they're outside, I don't want to like open those hollow leaves up and invite in water, moisture, pests, etc. But this year I did give them another trim because they were just so long and so obnoxious. And the wind, we had really bad winds in April right after I planted them. They totally knocked my onions over like on their sides. And whoa, I don't know if you guys saw that. That's a huge butterfly. Oh my gosh. Wow. I really hope the camera caught that. But yeah, anyways, the wind knocked my onions over on the side like completely, and I was worried about them being able to ever like stand up on their own. So I did give them a trim this year. Ended up being fine. So maybe it's okay to trim them actually when they go out in the garden, but I'm probably not gonna like put that into practice moving forward, because I don't really think it's necessary unless like your onions are totally flattened like mine were, and it's just like another thing that you have to do. And I'm trying to find less things to have to do in my garden. I'm trying to be lower in maintenance because I've got at this point too big of a garden to like do all like everything to every plant. So yeah, I wouldn't recommend, or I guess I don't know, maybe it doesn't matter. I'm kind of like, you can tell, I'm a little wishy-washy on if you should trim them once they're out in the garden, but yeah, I think they're fine either way. And then also once they got into the garden, I was still watering every like week. Usually the rain is enough for me. And every week, if it didn't rain, I would use a hose and give them a nice deep watering, but I wasn't going crazy on the watering, especially towards the end of like life or growing life of the onions, like before harvesting. I always withhold some water as their necks start breaking and as they start drying out. I don't want to be watering them because I don't want to get the onion wet right before I'm about to cure them or right before I'm trying to dry them out. So I really like throughout their lifetime watering once a week. If the rain gets it that week, great. If we go 2 weeks without rain, you know, I'll water them. And then right before curing, right before harvesting, I definitely am not watering. Throughout the season, I do foliar feeds for fertilizing. So I said when they were seedlings inside, every watering to every other watering, I was mixing in liquid fertilizer into the water. And then also when they were in the garden, and I do this for my whole garden, this is not just onions, I was spraying liquid fertilizer on them. So I have like a 2-gallon fertilizer thing. I'll link it in the description. I don't even know, it's from like TSC or something. I fill that up with 2 gallons of water, and then I fill it up with some liquid fertilizer. I just follow the directions on the fertilizer to know how much. I kind of always just like change it up. I don't have it down to a perfect science, so I'll leave all the ones I use in the bio. I do, or in the description. I use that same like fish and seaweed one that I was talking about, and I use a couple of Fox Farm ones, Grow Big and Big Bloom. I try to use Grow Big as they're growing big, and then I use the Big Bloom once they start really bulbing. And I just mix whatever the directions say, you know, per gallon, per 2 gallons. I just mix that into the sprayer, and then I would spray the onions like every 1 to 2 weeks. And that was on the same schedule as the rest of my garden. And then other than that, I mean, there's not a ton of other like maintenance. I think the biggest things that helped my onions get so big this season was the foliar feeds, was all the fertilizer. I did not fertilize as much last season. And then I almost want to say like maybe sunlight, but I don't know. I keep going back and forth on this one because a couple weeks ago, I felt like the bed that I put the yellow onions in wasn't getting as much sun as the red onion bed, and the yellow onions were in the red onion bed last year. But now today, judging with how big they are, I don't know if that had a factor. I need to pay more attention to see like the differences between the sun. But that is something that I got a lot of questions over on Instagram about, was like how many hours a day the sun, you know, what sunlight do they need, or reasons that they might not be growing. Sunlight is a huge thing for onions. They need the sun in order to bulb. So onions are not something that you can kind of just like put in a shady spot and expect to get big onions. You'll get some onions. They're not gonna be very big. So definitely like, and onions take forever to grow. Like that's a crop that I would prioritize a really sunny spot. Onions are something that I would not play with the sunlight needs. I would give them, you know, that full day of sun, like minimum 8 hours, if not more. That way they can really bulb to their full potential. Another question I got was specifically about like what type of onions to grow. And I cannot stress enough the importance of growing onions for your zone, or onions based on where you live. There's 3 different types of onions. There's short day, intermediate day, and long day. And that's literally relative to like the length of sun you have, or the length of your day for how much sun you get where you live. So the southern part of the United States is in a short day zone. The middle is intermediate. The north is in long day. And onions are categorized by those 3 different types of days. So if you're living in the south, you want to be growing short day onions. If you're living in the middle of the country, you want to do intermediate. Based on exactly where you are, you might be able to get away with long day or, you know, short day too, but intermediate is really kind of your sweet spot. And then if you're in the northern part of the country, you're going to want to do long day. Here in Michigan, my yellow onions are a long day variety. And then the red onions that I grow, those are actually an intermediate day. So I'm able to get away with those ones. But it is really important that you're growing onions for your specific zone. If you live in the South and you haven't had success with the onions, maybe look at the packets of what you've been growing and see if they're, you know, long day. Maybe they're not getting enough sun. They're literally not getting enough daylight throughout the day to bulb correctly. Or if you live in a northern state and you go short day and you're not having success, maybe that's the reason. So definitely pay attention to what types of onions you're growing in terms of like where you live. Overall, a lot of the questions I got were like, how did you grow them so big? And honestly, I feel like the key things are like growing from seed, starting those seeds early, because onions need a really long time to grow. I start my seeds like the first week of January. I put them in the garden the second week of April. So they're getting a full 3.5 months of growing before I even put them in the garden. And then, you know, they went in April, and these yellow ones didn't get pulled until August. So they've had a ton of time to grow. I did a ton of fertilizing this year, and people have their thoughts on fertilizing. I use organic fertilizers. They're natural, except for one I don't think is organic. I think one of the Fox Farm ones isn't, but I don't really mind that much. It's just one of them. I don't use it super often, but I also load up my beds with a ton of compost, both in the fall. So when I take this entire garden down, I'll be putting compost in every single bed. And then in the spring, before I plant anything, I'll also add more compost. And I do add worm castings and a little bit of fertilizer to the soil too. So I'm constantly feeding my onions. That way they have the fuel to grow big. And then just giving them adequate sunlight. I really think those 3 things is like what has helped me be successful last year, and then even more successful this year, is just giving them time to grow, starting from seed, fertilizing often, and giving them just a ton of sun. So I think that should cover everything. If you've got any additional questions, leave them down in the comments and I will do my best to answer them. I hope that if you grew onions this season, I hope they are looking amazing. If you were in the middle of curing them and you're, you know, trying to figure out like how to store them, what to do next, I hope this video helped. Or if you've never grown onions and you're looking to next year, I hope this video gave you the info that you need, or the info that you wanted in order to grow really big onions. So thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please leave a like, subscribe if you want to see more of my gardening content, and I will see you in the next video. Thank you so much for watching.